Are carbohydrates bad? No. Do you have to earn your carbohydrates? Yes. Is a low carb diet helpful? Yes, especially if you have metabolic dysregulation. And how I would define that is metabolic syndrome.
Body fat percentage is an outdated biomarker.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I think that actually intermuscular adipose tissue is more impactful on metabolic health than body fat percentage.
It's a fairly novel hypothesis linking skeletal muscle to erectile function.
Now we have every person's attention.
And everybody loves a good boner.
40% of men by age 40 have erectile dysfunction.
How many? What percent?
You're lucky it didn't happen to you.
40%?
50% of men by 50 have erectile dysfunction.
Damn.
Whether your body fat percentage changes or your muscle mass changes, you can decrease your intermuscular adipose tissue by exercise. We exercise muscle for 3 different buckets. Ready?
Yeah.
Muscle mass and strength. Number 2, metabolic health. And number 3 is...
Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, welcome back to the show. My dear friend, how you doing?
I'm doing great, except when I walk into your kitchen, because there's no carbohydrates in here.
There's no, that's, first of all, that's not true.
Okay,
there
you're
are,
right.
there
2
are
apples and half a pint of blueberries. We've known each other for years, Max. Every time I come, it's 2 apples, maybe 1, and half a pint of blueberries. I'm going to starve here.
Well, your boy likes flavanols and anthocyanins. But no, I get it. I get it that carbohydrates are valuable, and we've been fed, no pun intended, a lot of mistruths and half-truths about carbohydrates and their place in muscle-centric diet. So why don't we... That's a fantastic place to start the episode, Dr. Lyon.
Yeah.
Let's debunk low-carb myths.
Okay.
Because low-carb diets have been positioned as a silver bullet for everything from weight loss to metabolic syndrome, but carbs are not the enemy. Am I right?
You're right. Bad cooking is the enemy. Okay, carbohydrates. How do we define carbohydrates? You've got your carbohydrates like pasta and rice and potato and things that are white. You have your anthocyanins, like you're talking about, vegetables and fruits. And then you've got we covered rice, and then, like your processed, highly palatable, ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
Now, the first question is, I think that we all want to know is, how do we design a nutrition plan and a diet for a healthy metabolism? We can agree upon that.
Yeah, of course.
We know that there's carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and that carbohydrates are not an essential nutrient, meaning your body can make all the carbohydrates it needs. So if we were to think about something on the high end, for every 100 grams of protein, your body will generate 60 grams of carbohydrates. It's probably on the high end, but it's somewhere along the lines of that.
Is that gluconeogenesis? Is that what you're describing?
That's exactly right. Gluconeogenesis. But dietary protein is an essential macronutrient, and you need more of it as you age. Essential fatty acids, they're only roughly maybe 4 grams. So it's minimal. Now, as Americans, do you know how many carbohydrates we eat on average?
I'm going to take a guess that it's in the hundreds.
Yes, it's in the 300s.
Damn.
The average American eats 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. The RDA, take it or leave it, is set at 130 grams. However, that is 2 standard deviations above what is felt to be necessary. What do I mean by that? 80 grams of glucose is what we need. And that doesn't mean that we need to eat it. That's how much we need for body function. So there's the obligatory use, the brain, the red blood cells, the kidney, then there's the organ systems, then there's muscle, which doesn't burn many carbohydrates at rest. It burns primarily fatty acids. So this is how, and then obviously some get stored as glycogen. The 80-gram amount is something that we know is safe, and again, we can generate it all. Now, the next question is, if it is set at 2 standard deviations at 130 grams of carbohydrates, do we actually need that? Is that safe, or do we need to earn our carbohydrates? And I would say that how we make carbohydrate decisions is twofold. How many carbohydrates can you eat in a 24-hour period of time? So just like we think about protein, right? So our protein decision is, how much protein do you need in a 24-hour period? And then depending on how high that is, you worry about distribution. The first meal, the last meal. But we don't talk about that for carbohydrates, do we?
Mm-mm.
Have you ever thought of the carbohydrate threshold?
I've not. And I think part of the reason has to do with the fact that carbohydrates are relatively easy to consume, whereas protein takes more work. It's more expensive. Protein tends to be more pricey.
Unless you come to your house and you have protein chips.
Fair, yes.
Okay. So the first meal, if you think about carbohydrates, now carbohydrates, glucose is toxic to the body at high levels. So we need a certain amount to maintain blood sugar, but anything above that is considered toxic and abnormal. In fact, in a 2-hour period, we have a name for that. If your glucose remains elevated, and that is?
Type 2 diabetes.
Exactly. We do not have a name for that for protein. This is with the understanding that elevated levels of blood glucose can be toxic to the body. And you release insulin, you have a high carbohydrate load, you use insulin to move glucose out of the bloodstream into cells. This should not be used every day. We do not want to depend on insulin to move glucose out of the bloodstream. We, number one, don't want to have too many carbohydrates at that one meal. And number two, we have to use our muscle to move glucose out of the bloodstream into muscle without the use of insulin. Okay, so this is like a very long-winded story. The other aspect of carbohydrates, and we're going to come back to, are carbohydrates bad? And I think that they're bad for some people. If 74% or so of Americans are either overweight or obese, I'm assuming they have some kind of, if not overt, metabolic dysregulation, right? So when we begin to think about how we design a diet, and everybody talks about carbohydrates, is how many carbohydrates per day. But it really comes down to how many carbohydrates per meal, and how do we dispose of those carbohydrates if we are sedentary? The answer to that is roughly, I wouldn't have anyone go over 40 or so grams of carbohydrates at a meal. Beyond that, you begin to distort metabolism. And the number could be 50. But with outside of exercise, then you're going to have challenges with, over time, distorting your metabolism.
It probably varies according to body size and more specifically muscle mass, right? Like a small under-muscled lady might effectively dispose of a much lower dose bolus of glucose as compared to a 220-pound
I think that's a really great point.
Bodybuilding male.
Yes, and I think that's a really great point, that skeletal muscle is your primary site for glucose disposal. As we age and people become more inactive, you have less muscle mass. And, there's muscle atrophy from disuse and denervation and medications, all kinds of reasons that we are up against, chronic inflammation, that we lose, and sedentary behavior, that we lose skeletal muscle. However, when it comes to carbohydrates, if we were to correct for carbohydrate intake, I think we can put the body in somewhat of a safety space where we can really begin to, number one, stop chasing blood sugar regulation, and number two, really begin to focus on and prioritize protein. So that first meal of the day, again, carbohydrate consumption, are carbohydrates bad? No. Do you have to earn your carbohydrates? Yes. Is a low-carb diet helpful? Yes, especially if you have metabolic dysregulation. And how I would define that is metabolic syndrome. So, percent body fat over 30, high blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, elevated insulin, elevated glucose. People will say that is a diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. And I would say, and you would say, that is a diagnosis of unhealthy skeletal muscle. Because what we are seeing is the muscle's inability to be able to manage those metabolites.
Yeah, and I think like another way to think about your skeletal muscle is sponges for glucose, essentially. And so if you are metabolically unwell, defined as having one or more of these characteristics of metabolic syndrome, you've essentially become glucose intolerant. So by adopting a low carbohydrate diet, you're essentially people say that it'll cause them to require less medication, potentially, But what about, I mean, there's also a slew of randomized controlled trials. I mean, I think Kevin Hall was like instrumental in this, showing that, you know, for somebody who is overweight, I mean, you just put them in a calorie deficit and insulin sensitivity tends to come back.
Yes, that is absolutely true. If calories are controlled, that it makes a lot of sense. But the average American eats between 500 and 1,000 more calories than the resting energy expenditure requirement. And so in an ideal world, when you're in a metabolic ward or something like that, I used to work in one, everything is controlled. They are in a bed, watching TV, getting their food delivered. I can't even go to your house and get, the French fries are frozen. I can't even get anything, right? So, but the reality is, we could duplicate anything in science in a clinical study or a trial or a laboratory. But in real life and faced with food choices, most people are over-consuming total calories and carbohydrates. The average protein intake is around 80 grams a day. That's average, so 50% or above, 50% or below. But roughly the average carbohydrate intake is around 300. And that's almost 3 times more than we should be having, especially if we also recognize that the majority of people are sedentary.
Yeah.
50% of people aren't even working out.
You're right. They're not even getting the 20 minutes a day recommended by the WHO.
Exactly. And especially women are not doing resistance training. So again, do we believe in a low carb diet? I think it can be very valuable for individuals that have metabolic dysfunction, but is it necessary? No, if calories are controlled.
Now, what about the argument that some in the low carb community will make that it's carbohydrates in and of themselves that are driving metabolic illness, that are driving obesity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think people like Kevin Hall and Don Layman would say that it is more of a total caloric load than it is a total carbohydrate load, which would make sense.
Yeah, because I mean, the most calorically dense foods in the standard American diet, yeah, they're rich in carbohydrates, but they're also rich in fat. Like French fries are not just carbohydrates, right? They're carbs and fat. Pizza, donuts. I mean, these are foods that are rich in both carbohydrates and fats. And so when you see people that say that they've removed carbs from their diets and they've cut out the French fries and they've cut out the donuts, like, yeah, you're removing some carbs from your diet, but you're also cutting out a hefty amount of added fat calories.
Yeah, and that is a really good point. When we think about the Healthy Eating Index, which is this survey data of what people are actually eating, Americans are consuming 98% more processed foods than they should be. Processed foods, refined grains, and sugars. We are not over-consuming protein. Are we over-consuming fat? I think it's pretty stable at around 30 grams or 30%. I mean, you can correct me. It's I think roughly 11% saturated fat, and maybe 35% of the saturated fat is coming from pizza, cheese, which is crazy. I was talking earlier today, and when you look at the number one fruits, it's banana and tomato, as in tomato sauce.
Interesting.
Or ketchup for French fries.
Wow.
I mean, so we really have to rethink and reorient ourselves to muscle health. And we're finally getting there because it really has been 60 years of fighting an obesity epidemic.
Can we talk about some of the benefits of carbohydrates? Because I feel like carbohydrates are often vilified, but there are some very significant benefits to eating carbohydrates. I mean, you came into my house.
I was very angry.
You're like, Max, where are the carbs?
Well, what I want to know, what has gotten you interested in this? Because did something happen where you're like, gosh, I've been trying low carb and I'm training, although I don't know, and you're like bonking and you need carbs. What happened?
Well, first of all, there was an observation that I made where, I do tend to follow bodybuilding to some degree, at least on social media. And, it's rare to find bodybuilders that are low carb. I mean, you can find them, but it's like, look at Chris Bumstead, right? Like, look at any professional bodybuilder. Like, from my observation, my amateur observation, it's like when in prep mode, they're keeping their carbohydrates as high as they can, and they're still getting shredded. So it's like carbohydrates are not inherently fattening. That was like the first, observation that I made. And then on top of that, in 2020, I took up boxing, and I noticed that without a little bit of carbs in my system, I would bonk. I would just get like...
I remember when you were boxing, you had that boxing. I was wondering where that was in this studio.
Yeah.
It's like gone now.
It was a short-lived hobby of mine. I was like sparring one day with my trainer, and I got hit in the head, and I was like, nope, I'm out.
That's hilarious, but not funny. That is important to recognize, is that, number one, those guys, their goal is hypertrophy and maintaining skeletal muscle. So they have a very defined diet. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because one of the things that I think is a challenge is most people do not count calories. We were talking before, my playbook has a strategy for eating where they don't have to count calories. You can visualize it on your plate. And what we recommend is a 1-to-1 ratio of protein to carbohydrates, to not actually go over that. And here's why. And again, if you're metabolically unhealthy and you feel like you need to cut carbohydrates, then you can, but inherently you don't have to have a low carbohydrate diet, because think about it. If you cover your protein needs, which is critical, it's essential, and then you think about as a plate, right? There's a plate, you've got one portion of the plate is protein, so 1/3 of the plate is protein. Depending on your activity, 1/3 is carbohydrates. You and I were joking, it could be potato, right? Because you're like, oh my God, you eat potato? Yeah, man, give me some rice cakes too. But also, I woke up and I trained today. And then the other 1/3 would be some kind of fibrous vegetable. There's a fiber ratio. You don't want a ton of, for example, banana is very high in carbohydrates. A small banana might have 30 grams of carbs. You don't need all that. But then if you begin to think about, how do I balance a plate for metabolic health, it becomes very simple. And, part of the challenge for people is it feels overwhelming and it feels overcomplicated, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I also think it's like important to, people literally are out there on social media fear-mongering fruit and carbs, and, carbohydrates are muscle sparing, right? They're protein sparing. Underneath the bucket of carbohydrates, you have fiber. And fiber, even though it's a non-digestible carbohydrate, it's still counted, not maybe in terms of net carbohydrates, but like a net carbohydrate contribution, but it's still like a form of carb. And so I noticed that, like, people, when you eat carbs, it keeps your muscles full, right?
Glycogen, muscle glycogen. And that becomes important if you, number one, want to be able to perform. Again, and also your body will become accustomed. So you want your muscle to burn fatty acid at rest.
Like, I think people think of you as like the protein queen, but you came into my house asking for carbs.
And what did I do last year? Come into your house asking for what?
Carbs.
Exactly. I already have, protein is easy to get covered. It is. And my diet is high in protein, but it is also moderate to probably higher in carbohydrates. Again, you see me, I'm like all over the place. I'm moving around, and so I'm very active. And, one of the things that happens is that people are sedentary and they move less. And in midlife, there's some belief that as estrogen declines, people's spontaneous movement goes down. And in order to, I think of muscle like this. Muscle is like a suitcase. You open the suitcase and you're going on a trip for 4 days. Now, if you're like me, you open the suitcase and instead of packing for 4 days, you're packing for 40. And I got 5 pairs of shoes and 3 sweaters and 2 jackets. There is no way that I'm getting my clothes in that small little carry-on. So of course I close it, and this is representation of muscle. I close the suitcase, and everything's everywhere. I cannot get any more clothes in that suitcase. Muscle is the same. So if you are not training and doing, both resistance training and cardiovascular, both have 2 different impacts. But if you are not dumping that muscle glycogen and utilizing that fuel, then when you are eating and opening up your suitcase and stuffing more clothes in there, you've not emptied the first trip out. And so glucose, fatty acids, branched chain amino acids remain in the bloodstream. They have nowhere to go. Eventually, it'll get stored as adipose tissue or some, it will have to be disposed of. And so, back to your original question, low carbohydrate diets, let's debunk it. Is it good for everybody? It's not necessary for everybody. Can it be helpful? Yes. But I think an even bigger, more important conversation is how do we eat for muscle health, and how do we define muscle health, and how do we begin to think about it? So if you are over-consuming carbohydrates, and let's say you're not even over-consuming them, but you have done nothing, your muscle is already full. Your muscle glycogen is full, right? So as you're in an overnight fast, maybe you're using some liver glycogen, but liver glycogen stores are probably 100 grams.
Not much.
Not much. So the other point that you made is carbohydrates, they ride along with fiber, also very good. Phytonutrients, nutrients and things that we don't get from animal-based products. I think that that's really important. And so we're not vilifying one group over the other. And, I do think that there's a lot of discussion around timing, carbohydrate timing. And I think that's less important. It's more of an overall 24-hour period, unless you are doing some major endurance activity. So my husband, Shane, loves to run marathons. He's bananas. And if he does not have carbohydrates, but then again, there's Zach Bitter, who is a low-carb ultra guy. And I think that there's interpersonal variability and ways in which we train the muscle to respond, and we can fuel it appropriately. But it's also very easy to tell if your carbohydrate intake is too high. And that is by looking at your blood work, which would be reflective of healthy skeletal muscle.
Are you a fan of CGMs?
I use them and I don't use them. I haven't used them for a while. I think it's helpful if you want to know what affects you, which is interesting to think that blueberries, those half-eaten pint of blueberries, could affect me differently than they affect you. And that is interesting. But yes, I have used CGMs. I recommend them to patients if they need it, but it's not a necessity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, so when optimizing for skeletal muscle, protein, you would say, is where we ought to put most of our effort, because most people tend to be under-consuming protein these days.
Yes, especially because protein is set at a minimum. And, this is so fun that we get a chat. And we know that nitrogen balance, and, you and I have talked about this, these protein recommendations, which we know the intake, these nitrogen balance studies were done in 18 to, 25-year-old males, that the protein intake, so for those listening, and I'm sure they already know this, that the current protein recommendations are based on nitrogen balance studies from, the early 1900s. Is there any place in medicine that that uses a study from the early 1900s?
No.
To say that this is what it should be?
The field of Alzheimer's, maybe, but...
But, come on.
Yeah.
But when you think about nitrogen balance, and I'm going to ask you this question, so let's say we know that the intake is overestimated from these 25-year-old men, and the excretion is underestimated. Okay, so what does that mean? It basically just gives us this number for nitrogen balance. Also, all amino acids are, quote, considered the same in these studies. So leucine would be the same as a non-essential amino acid. We know that it's just nitrogen, but it's not specific enough. And now I'm going to ask you a question. So this is the minimum for preventing, quote, deficiencies based on nitrogen balance. Are you ready for it?
Ready.
Tell me one health outcome that you know of that is related to nitrogen balance.
I don't know of any.
Exactly. We don't know any health outcome related to nitrogen balance. And so we can say it's a flawed study, and I think that's important. But one step deeper is, okay, what's the actual health outcome that is related to nitrogen balance? How does using something that's used in agriculture from the 1900s currently relate to the minimum to prevent deficiencies? I don't even think that we have that. That number as the minimum is probably incorrect. And again, this is how do we evolve the protein conversation? Nitrogen balance, we understand that, but it's beyond setting a minimum and also even asking the question. The question is that number even relevant? I don't think that number is actually a relevant number.
So what is?
Well, we know that from the data that anything closer to 1.1 to 1.2 is going to be better from a muscle outcome and also lean body mass. And we're going to talk about this because I actually got interviewed by Consumer Reports, investigative journalism, and it wasn't the nicest message.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was. So you say that people should be eating double the RDA, which is 1.6 grams per kg. But all these other people say that you shouldn't. And
by the way, you're not the only one. I mean, many experts are saying
of course. Of course. But for whatever, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because I.
But they singled you out.
So we'll see what the article says. But here's what they said. They said this meta-analysis had 20-some studies. None of them showed a benefit of having a higher protein diet. And I was like, okay, if sarcopenia is a 4% loss per decade, 4%, what percent change in lean body mass between groups do you expect to see in 10 to 12 weeks?
I don't know.
Therefore, perhaps a 10 to 12 week study, you don't expect to show changes in lean body mass between groups. DEXA is not sensitive enough. And not only that, if you relate that to, say, the general population, sarcopenia is a 4% change per decade. If you want that study to be relevant, you're going to need to do it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's an ability to, if we look at these questions, which I think you're very good at challenging and thinking. I mean, you were a journalist, and I guess you still are a journalist. You still are a health journalist.
Yeah, last I checked,
No.
yeah.
So the question isn't, so when we see these studies and you see these experts or, Consumer Reports saying, but it didn't show any change, well, you're right. What were you expecting? And also, protein isn't just for lean body mass.
Right.
It's for thermogenesis. It's for satiety. It's for rebuild and repair. Your body completely regenerates, repairs itself, renews itself. It's a different body 4 times a year. We become less efficient at being able to repair and go through protein turnover. And so it just is interesting when you see in the literature, and again, various journalists say, we shouldn't be eating such a high protein diet, and not asking the question of, well, what changes do you expect to see?
Well, those journalists don't seem like they know very much about muscle protein synthesis and about, I would even go so far as to say science, because it's like, thanks to your advocacy and the work of your mentor, Don Layman, we know about the leucine threshold, the muscle full effect, right? We know that it takes a certain amount of protein to optimally stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
And then the next question is, tell me the negative consequences. I can tell you the negative consequences of carbohydrates. Fatty acids, maybe not so much. The body makes saturated fat. If you overconsume fat, though, you will store fat. It's excess calories. Protein, if you overconsume protein, will you store it? You will, but it seems to be much more difficult to overeat protein to have a negative physical outcome. And so the range of protein that you could have, at the lower end, it's 10%, up to 30%. But there is a biological drive to eat these amino acids. And that's which is the protein leverage hypothesis. So when we hear in the landscape of nutrition, why are you saying eat 1.6 grams per kg? Well, yes, it can protect lean body mass, but it can also do a whole host of other things that no other nutrient can. There is an essential need, and we know that the efficiency of muscle decreases as we age. And this kind of goes back to, how do we consume protein, right? There's this whole distribution. To date, all of the studies that we really have is based on that first meal. I think when I came here last, maybe I said 30 grams 3 times a day. It's not. There's no evidence for that second meal. If someone is listening to this and they're like, Gabrielle, I want to know, how do I eat to lose weight, maintain muscle mass, or have longevity? I got you covered. Number 1, You decide how much protein you need and for what. So protein decisions are based on age first, activity next, metabolic function, and then preference.
Age first. So how does that, because protein recommendations are usually given by weight, right? 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. So how is aging incorporated into that?
I really appreciate this question. I don't recommend anyone go below 100 grams of protein a day. Bare minimum. Man or woman, you shouldn't be below 100 grams. Because we see less than that doesn't seem to have the same positive metabolic effects. Okay, so as you age, so I got 2 little kids. You know, they're crazy. My 4-year-old son, he's training for the SEAL teams right now, Leonidas.
Damn.
I know. I am raising winners, all I can say.
I mean, you name a kid Leonidas.
I know. He better not be able, I mean, he's already, yeah. And my daughter is Aries Hunter. I mean, these kids better be tough. But all kidding aside, when you're young, there's not this threshold, this amino acid threshold, right? There's a ton of flexibility. You could eat 5 grams of protein and do whatever you want. You just look at something and you're already anabolic. We recognize that. But as you age, and let's say 35, we'll just pick 35, there seems to be an increase in anabolic resistance and the efficiency of muscle to utilize protein, which can be overcome by dosing it appropriately. People are like, well, timing doesn't matter, distribution doesn't matter. But that's not entirely true. And I would say that it depends. The most important thing is getting in your 24-hour period. But if you want to be very astute and really build a nutrition plan that supports healthy aging and healthy brain health, you have to design a plan that also has glucose regulation. And the way that you're going to do that is to actually take a moment and look at your meal distribution. First meal of the day, after coming out of an overnight fast, between 35 and 55 grams of protein. Easy. The second meal of the day, it doesn't matter actually, which is new because once you trigger muscle protein synthesis, it's not, that could go on for hours. You know, some of the data would suggest 2 to 3 hours, but we think it's longer. So there's other factors like EIF4, there's other initiation factors that are still going. So this machinery is very active. So you could probably get away with a lot less protein and it might not even be dependent on leucine. Okay. And that last meal, when you're going into an overnight fast, should be another larger meal. And that's, again, between 40 and 50 grams. And that's how you would design a diet. And then layer in the carbohydrates, no more than 50 grams, and especially not in that first meal, outside of exercise. And then fat, you decide. So you can, fat and carbohydrates are interchangeable.
Right. Both energy, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. But so tactically, like, what does that look like for you? Like, describe your breakfast, your first meal of the day, your last meal of the day. Like, when it comes to protein, because I know you're a big advocate of animal source protein, as am I. I mean, are you concerned about the fat content of the proteins that you're consuming? Do you know, how liberally do you use oil, which is, you know, one of the most calorie dense, if not the most calorie dense food in a modern kitchen? Like, what is it?
But not in your kitchen.
No, I mean, I use oil. I used to use it a lot more liberally, and honestly, like these days, I'm very moderate with my.
And I'm only teasing because I don't think I've ever seen you cook.
That's fair. That's fair. I try to cook as much as I can, but I do. You know, I live in LA, and I get lazy sometimes, and I hate cleaning up. But I do cook. I'm a good cook. I mean, I wrote a cookbook.
You are a good cook. You have to exercise that cooking muscle. And listen, next time I come, prove it to me that you're a good cook. Fats, I don't really care about.
Challenge accepted.
Okay, good. And to be fair, I'm a very small human, right? I'm like
you're tiny.
I'm like 5'1", maybe $110. I don't have a huge caloric need. So for me, and I'm also traveling for the playbook, talking about it, I have a shake. I had a shake this morning, and I also had some Greek yogurt, and I got some berries. That's it. Simple. And then on the way here, I did another podcast. I stopped at the gas station. I got 2 hard-boiled eggs that are still sitting in the car. Gross. I got a Built bar, and I got a beef jerky.
I love Built bars.
I do too. And that's it.
They're my favorite.
And then I got a Celsius. Don't hate me. Okay? I'm being so truthful. That's what I have. There's only one way to do it wrong, and that's to not do it. I'm on the road. I forgot everything. I'm like running around. My kids are calling me, reading the studies so I can share it with you on erectile dysfunction and muscle mass. We're not going to get there yet because I have other things that are important.
Oh, we're going to get there, yeah.
I was able to wing it and still stay on my plan. That's it. And then you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to do another podcast after this, and then I'm going to order dinner on the way home, room service. It sounds a little bougie, but you can call it DoorDash. I'm traveling. Dinner's going to be there when I get there.
What's that going to look like?
Well, it's definitely not going to be the fish because I had that and it was gross, so it will probably be steak. That's it. And so we overcomplicate and we have all these interrelated discussions and we get all heated. And the reality is we chase novelty. I think part of the reason we all fight so much is because we're chasing novelty. The brain likes excitement. And if I said, hey, let me give you some foundational truths that have already been innovated, and here's what you're going to do, here's what your plate looks like, here's some recipes, which I did put recipes in there, and they're amazing. You don't have to chase novelty. You have to limit distraction and execute on the next right thing. It's not hard. Very important. And there's some other things that I want to share with you that I think are important. Now, I'm going to say a big statement, and that is I think body fat percentage is an outdated biomarker.
Body fat percentage is an outdated biomarker?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I think that actually intermuscular adipose tissue is more impactful on metabolic health than body fat percentage. So we have, and it's not unusual for us to hyper focus on something, and then as humans we have a cognitive bias, so then we all believe that this same thing is true, that a body fat percentage of 30, and listen, is correlated to metabolic syndrome, like all these other things. But you have these outliers like, I don't know, linemen and other people that have a higher level of body fat but do not have metabolic dysregulation, the fit and fat phenomenon, right? And so I was sitting on my podcast, and do you ever have aha moments on your podcast?
Oh, all the time.
You do?
I've had like 3 so far today.
Well, I hope they're on this one because anyway, if they're not. So I was sitting across from Melanie Cree, who is one of the world-leading experts on PCOS and fertility. So polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the #1 cause of female infertility for young women. And I was fixated on this body fat percentage question. And I'm like, Melanie, what percent body fat is the cutoff for those that get better and are able to have a child and do all this stuff than those that don't? And like when the guest looks at you kind of like you're an idiot and you just don't want, and you're just like, what did I ask? Is there something, do I have spinach in my teeth? And she looks at me and she's like, well, Gabrielle, and by the way, when I say expert, there are, 10 studies of PCOS and GLP-1s. She's done 2 of them.
Wow.
Like she is she's pioneering this. And she goes, well, Gabrielle, it's actually, body fat's irrelevant. I was like, well, what do you mean? PCOS is related to obesity. There's some metabolic PCOS. And she's like, it's irrelevant. Well, then what is it? And she said, it's the percentage of intermuscular adipose tissue that causes the metabolic derangement. And it is that determines how successful a woman is going to be. And, I'm paraphrasing it, that can be treated. And one reason GLP-1s might be beneficial in PCOS is that it helps lower intermuscular adipose tissue. So mark my words, if we can, in a more effective population way, measure the fat inside the muscle, we are going to find that is, I don't want to say this because I don't know for sure, but is more relevant, or at least as relevant, I would say more relevant than body fat percentage. And I would say that the changes and the dysregulation in skeletal muscle probably happen first. Don Layman might not agree. He's like, you're talking about stem cells and progenitor cells. I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I will tell you that when someone is thinking about their thigh muscle, you want it to look like a fillet. You do. You don't want it to look like a Wagyu beefsteak.
Right.
Right? But think about it. When you are sedentary, you do not have to gain excess body fat to have unhealthy skeletal muscle.
Interesting.
Skinny fat people, like if you are skinny fat, right? Which, this is not, I'm just saying like if you have this body type, saying anything bad, but these people have, if you look at their muscle, one of the reasons that we're seeing, number one, like you said, they don't have a place for carbohydrates to go. But if they're sedentary over time, their muscle looks like a Wagyu steak and they don't have body fat. You know, you're not talking about looking at someone and going, you have 20 pounds of excess body fat, because the fat is infiltrated into the muscle as well as the viscera. And we all talk about visceral fat, but we're not talking about myosteatosis, which is fat that is infiltrated into the tissue.
That's fascinating, because you often think about genetics as being the key variable that dictates fat distribution.
I never thought about that.
On the body, right? But in fact, what you're saying is that where you store fat is modified by our activity levels.
Yes, but also that the derangement happens early in skeletal muscle, and that we have been hyper-focused, just like we've been hyper-focused on obesity, that it's the percent body fat number that matters, but we haven't been looking at the intermuscular adipose. And I am guessing, and I've done some analyses, that it's the intermuscular adipose tissue, and it's not much. It could be like 5%, because there's, you don't have, 40% of your body weight is muscle. There's all sorts of other stuff in there. There's connective tissue, but it is the percent body fat that I think is going to be more relevant than the percent of body fat. It's the percent of intermuscular adipose tissue. And once we get good at that, then it doesn't matter or does it not, and here's why it matters. Whether your body fat percentage changes or your muscle mass changes, you can decrease your intermuscular adipose tissue by exercise. And so whether you have a body transformation or not, the simple act of contracting skeletal muscle and creating the need for energy use will utilize that as fuel. And why is this important? It's important because we are very focused on the external, build muscle, lose body fat. But if we recognize that skeletal muscle is the organ of longevity, and it's the largest organ, although my husband, who's in urology, would say something else is important, but that muscle as an organ system, the simple act of utilizing it without external changes actually helps the health of that tissue become more regulated.
Wow. Okay, so now I have this hypothesis, because you said earlier that, generally at rest and during low intensity exercise, our muscles are using primarily fat as a substrate, as an energy source. Does that mean when getting to the specific kind of exercise to help prevent or reduce the accumulation of intramuscular fat, that it's low intensity exercise that is more effective, or is it ultimately any type of exercise?
This is a great question, and I don't know the answer to that, but what I will say is exactly what you said. So endurance type exercise, which is type 1 fibers, those fibers seem to use fatty acids, and then the more intense, you use more glucose. I actually have been thinking a lot about this, because it's hard for me to understand. So there's a type 1 and a type 2 fiber. Type 1 fiber, and then the type 2 fiber is the fibers that you think are big and bulky and are using glucose, right? They have more glycogen. But thinking about that and thinking about the mix of those two and how it changes fuel use from a overall practical perspective, I can't figure out. It's just hard for me to understand, because you're not going to know your percentage of type fibers, right? And so then the question becomes, if you are doing resistance training, are you depleting that intermuscular adipose tissue? And I would say, if I were to think about the athlete's paradox, which the athlete's paradox is that when people are doing endurance type exercise, you know what the athlete's paradox is?
No.
Okay, it's that fat, there's lipids within the muscle that are near mitochondria, and that fat within that muscle is used for energy.
Interesting.
So for example, my husband, who runs marathons in his spare time, has a lot of triglycerides within his muscle, but it is in close proximity to mitochondria.
Whoa.
Versus someone who is sedentary. So this is readily used for energy versus, right? So he's doing his run, he's using those carbs, versus someone who is sedentary, and you've got fat that is intermuscular, so it's like fat between the tissue that mitochondria does not readily have access to. And so over time, it becomes more difficult and it changes the composition of the tissue. Can you change that in one bout of exercise? I mean, to the best of my knowledge, we can begin to improve it. But would it change the fuel utilization? I would say that we exercise muscle for three different buckets. Ready?
Yeah.
Muscle mass and strength, my favorite. Number 2, metabolic health, which we talked about, glucose disposal, fatty acid oxidation, myokines, amino acid reserve. And number 3 is the plumbing, vascular health. We know that exercising skeletal muscle is the way to improve endothelial health, vascular health, nitric oxide, all of these other things. And so I know that this is a very long-winded answer, and I can't give you a yes or no, but I think that we can recognize that why we are training muscle is in part for those 3 buckets, and whether you have high levels of intermuscular adipose tissue or not, regardless, you will improve it through any form of exercise.
Wow. Well, it just goes to show you how valuable muscle is from the standpoint of metabolic health and ultimately longevity, health span.
Yeah, or muscle span.
Or muscle span.
And I really think that we've been looking at the wrong tissue. Again, body fat percentage matters, but we haven't really looked at intermuscular adipose tissue, which I think is difficult to look at because it has high flux. You know, as you're training, you'll see a flux. But again, that percentage over time, I think, is really what drives insulin resistance and metabolic dysregulation, which I think is, you know, that's what we're trying to fix. That's what we're trying to solve for.
What kind of scan would help
MRI
you visual?
or CT.
Got it.
And one of the reasons that I was so impressed with Melanie Cree is she was looking at exercising muscle in an MRI machine.
Wow.
Bananas.
Damn.
You don't know this, but I work with my colleagues at Baylor. And again, I just published a paper on sexual function and muscle mass. They have a wonderful andrology department. We are looking at intermuscular adipose tissue under ultrasound. And I will let you know if testosterone replacement therapy for men or women changes intermuscular adipose tissue. I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I can't wait to find out. Okay, let's talk about this paper.
Okay, let's split up.
Because everybody loves sex. And I think that it's a fairly novel hypothesis, right? Linking skeletal muscle to erectile function.
I mean, now we have every person's attention.
And everybody loves a good boner.
I mean, yeah.
Right?
And 40% of men by age 40 have erectile dysfunction.
How many? What percent?
You're lucky it didn't happen to you.
40%?
50% of men by 50 have erectile dysfunction.
Damn.
One out of 2 people. You just go to the girl, do you have erectile dysfunction? I can fix that for you.
Probably a good way to get punched in the face.
Probably.
But, yeah.
Definitely.
But okay, but you've got a potential.
No, not for me, for you.
No, I know.
They will punch you in the face.
No, I don't want that for me. But let's get to the potential solution here, because this is very empowering.
Okay, so first of all, is Sydney going to yell at us? Are we obstructing the view? Sydney,
No, we're good.
Okay.
We're good.
So basically, this is a paper that we published in Sexual Medicine Reviews, and it's exploring the link between muscle quality, which, again, we're kind of talking about, and erectile dysfunction, the impact of muscle mass and strength. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, that there is a positive correlation, we know correlation is not causation, between erectile function and muscle health. Muscle health we defined as being able to be strong, being able to have a good metabolic profile, and it says maintaining skeletal muscle with nutrition and physical activity improves erectile health and overall health outcomes. Therapies that target sexual function and muscle health simultaneously may have further benefits.
Well, yeah, because I mean, erectile strength is a surrogate for cardiovascular health.
It is.
Yeah. Why are we still using grip strength?
I don't know. You know, someone asked me that. They were like, how do you know how your grip strength? I'm thinking, that's, again, is this another anchoring bias? Is something that we've seen over and over again? But erectile function is probably the #1 indicator of a man's overall health. That and probably sperm health.
Wow. I'm good in both departments.
And testosterone. So I want to read another statistic. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. The prevalence of severe erectile dysfunction is higher in sarcopenic men, 73% versus 43% in one study. Sarcopenia is a disease that we think of as a disease of aging, low muscle mass and function. I don't think it is. Sarcopenia was given a diagnosis, was considered a disease 2016, 10 years ago. We should have an anniversary party. Before that, it was never considered relevant. And that's really important to understand for you guys listening. Every disease gets an ICD-10 code. If we think that sarcopenia is not a disease of aging, low muscle mass, strength, and function, which, by the way, right now we're working on treating the obesity epidemic with GLP-1s. I think that we are solving for that. And Don Layman gets very mad when I say that. I'm not saying that we've solved for obesity. 74% or so of us have challenges, but we are trading one epidemic for another. We're trading obesity for sarcopenia. And if I just told you that severe ED is higher, 73% versus 43%, and this is just one study in the older population, imagine as we put younger and younger people on GLP-1s in front of screens that are already sedentary, sarcopenia is not going to be the only thing that we have to worry about.
Wow. Now, but these GLP-1 drugs don't guarantee a sarcopenic phenotype, right? They don't guarantee muscle loss. It's just that they're not, patients are not necessarily being instructed to prioritize protein, to resistance train.
And actually, I have some really good data. I'd have to pull this up, but it is very difficult. And I used to run weight loss studies. It's very difficult to lose. You're never going to lose 100% fat. Even in fat, there's connective tissue. There is lean mass in fat within that. There's blood vessels. There's all kinds of things. And in a 12 to 16 week period of time, people will lose weight. And I have some really good numbers here because I was correlating the two. I'm thinking, okay, so where are we when it comes to, so this is, I know people can see my screen. So let me see. I don't know where my privacy screen is.
No, nobody can see it.
Are you sure?
Yeah, nobody can see it. Nobody can see it.
Are you sure?
I promise.
I have naked pictures of my husband.
I can see what people can see. Yeah, nobody can see it.
Totally kidding. Okay, so this is important. I want to look at...
Also worth noting that there's solid evidence that exercise can improve erectile function.
Yeah, it can.
So it's not just an observational finding.
No. We know the exercise, but this was pretty novel because people don't think about muscle mass and strength involved in erectile dysfunction. And I think that that's really important.
And by the way, this is not just of import to men and the women who love those men. It's also important directly to women because women have analogous erectile tissue in their nether regions as well.
They do. I have not heard nether regions in a very long time. And yes, this study didn't have women, but that would be something that we will look at because women have erectile dysfunction too. And it's not just in your head, ladies.
Probably harder to measure.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
And yes, it is. Okay, so let me...
Grip strength it is.
And back to grip strength.
Yeah.
No, there is I wish I could find this. I have a really good analysis because I think GLP-1s are here to stay. And the question is, if we lose muscle mass at 4% per decade, and all of a sudden people are becoming better at losing weight, the reality is, are they losing body fat on GLP-1s, which, by the way, I have a medical clinic. I'm still practicing physician. We use GLP-1s all the time. But you also have to recognize and acknowledge that if you are using GLP-1s in a sedentary individual, you are further losing skeletal muscle mass. Again, do they have to? They don't. Do they typically? Could be 20%. 20% loss of skeletal muscle mass. If in 10 years for sarcopenia, it's 4%. So we have to just recognize we're talking about things separately. But if we were to just compare the amounts, when you're young and healthy, it's easier to put on muscle. But as people age and are going on GLP-1s, they have to have a lifestyle in place. And we probably have to adjust the dosing. And we probably have to reevaluate hormones.
Here's a question that I actually have no idea the answer to. But I know that the first generation, and correct me if I'm wrong, of the GLP-1 drugs was semaglutide. But now they have these newer ones, right, that are more broad in terms of their effect. There's tirzepatide, there's retatrutide, if I recall correctly. Yeah, are any of them safer from the standpoint of muscle health?
I don't know. I think it's really in the dosing. And I also actually paradoxically believe that the GLP-1s are going to be good for skeletal muscle mass health, but it's the amount that we're using because GLP-1s, they're incretins. And it affects the brain, it slows gastric emptying, protein is considered nature's GLP-1, which interestingly at a dose of 30 grams or higher, maybe it has something to do with leucine, I don't know. But I do think that they are here to stay and there is utility for them, especially when it comes to the health of skeletal muscle. Yes, it helps with food noise. Yes, it helps with all these other things, but I do think that it can help with intramuscular adipose tissue. And we're going to start to see more of that. But again, we don't have good sensitive markers on a population level to be able to test for these things. DEXA looks at lean body mass, body fat, and bone. And that's where the challenge becomes because it's what difference, again, interpersonal do you expect to see between study participants? You don't expect it to be very sensitive.
Yeah.
So we don't have a great answer, but we do know, going back to what people can do, we know that reorienting their nutrition, there's a million different ways to do it well. But I do think that if we chase less novelty, we can double down on foundational health principles, which again, this is the plate. I put this in the playbook. It is the plate of how we look at it visually. And we went back and forth. We're like, do we track calories? Do we not? But we've been trying to do that. So let's give people something different.
Yeah.
And then how to actually think about dosing carbohydrates for muscle health. Because I haven't heard that talked about. Have you? That there's a carbohydrate threshold for dosing for muscle health. There's something called the Randall hypothesis. Have you heard of that? Randall hypothesis is that fatty acids dominate metabolism. Well, not necessarily. If you give enough carbohydrates dominate metabolism. And it's, are you burning fat or are you burning carbohydrates? And if you have a ton of carbohydrates, you force your body into the position to burn that. You shouldn't do that. Don't force your suitcase closed, right? It's just messy and it's all kinds of problems. You're probably going to ruin your clothes. Don't do that. And it's understanding that in order to have healthy muscle tissue, you have to not be sedentary. And that is the primary goal, whether it's resistance training, whether it's high intensity, whether it's cardiovascular. You have to maintain both type 1 and type 2 fibers.
Yeah. I'm a fan of carbohydrates. I think that they're great.
Then you need to buy some for your house so I can
should.
come next time because it's brutal.
What favorite source? Like, give me a shopping
potato.
list.
I went to dinner with the Krishners yesterday.
All right, next time you come over, I'm going to have a baked potato ready for you.
And Leanne, I love you guys. And we ordered baked potatoes. I was like, they're like, do you eat that? I'm like, in fact, give me 2. Just kidding. I ate half because that's about 30 grams of this baked potato. And then I ate a 6-ounce filet. And then I had 3 bites of dessert.
It sounds like a perfect meal to me.
It was.
Yeah.
Not hard. There's only one way to do it wrong.
It's just hard to find like quick access sources of carbs that aren't also loaded with added fats. You know what I'm saying? Like a baked potato is pure starch.
Yeah.
I could have made some rice for you. Give me a heads up next time.
Max, never. It's not going to happen. You're just going to give me those protein chips and I'll just have to be happy with it. But also, again, if something is high in fiber, I'm not as concerned about it. But if it is low in fiber, white like rice and pasta, all that stuff, you have to be very careful about and intentional. How are you eating for muscle health? I don't care about obesity. It's true. But I do care because it's much easier to gain fat than it is to build muscle. It's kind of a design flaw. But again, how do we shift the conversation to focus on muscle health? We know that we have to train. And, women and men, you don't have to actually train heavy. You have to provide enough stimulus to get that tissue healthy.
Well, it makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint that it would be more difficult to build and maintain muscle because muscle is metabolically expensive. I mean, you've talked about this on, many times, that muscle burns calories, not a huge amount of additional calories, but it does burn extra calories just sitting on your frame. And back prior to food security being something that we as a species were able to secure for ourselves, that was a risky proposition because it's, muscle is yeah, it's expensive to maintain.
Yet now we're here, and now we know what we have to do if you want to age well. Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes of the brain, it doesn't start in the brain. It starts with the health of muscle, because as we become more metabolically deranged, elevated triglycerides, elevated glucose, this affects, when I was at WashU, I don't know if we've talked about this, but part of my research was looking at body composition and brain function. Did you know that?
I think, probably. Yeah.
Okay. So I imaged
you're amazing.
I paid him to say that, guys. So I was imaging these people's brains, and the heavier they were, the less muscle mass they had, the worse their brain volume. And it wasn't it doesn't start as an obesity problem. It starts as a muscle problem. And even those individuals that were, quote, skinny fat with low skeletal muscle all had abnormal metabolism. This is all about reorienting ourselves to a more impactful conversation, and especially in the landscape of the use of GLP-1s. We are going to see sarcopenia earlier and earlier and more often. With sarcopenia comes osteoporosis. Low muscle mass is a possible indicator of low bone density. I don't know about you, but I think that the idea of having a frail future, that's terrifying.
Yeah. No, your observations are completely consistent with the literature that I've seen linking frailty to increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. Even going to dietary food questionnaires, higher levels of protein seem to be, and animal protein actually specifically seem to be linked to reduced shrinkage of the hippocampus, a slowing of the atrophy rate of the hippocampus. That was a recent study that came out. There's all kinds of data now, painting a fairly clear picture for us that, everything that you're saying checks out from the standpoint of aging well, especially with regards to the brain. So
more to come. The intermuscular adipose tissue is going to be the next thing. Mark my words. Intermuscular adipose tissue. We have to get really good at figuring out the numbers and the influence of that, the dietary influence, the exercise influence, just really, really specific, and the treatment protocols. And does hormone replacement therapy help that? At what level do GLP-1s work? And also, can we talk about my playbook before we leave?
Absolutely, of course. Yeah, your work is so important. So the Forever Strong Playbook. Forever Strong obviously was a huge hit of a book. Tell me about this new spin-off that you've created for us.
This is a standalone book. This is the book that I wish that I had. And it is how to think, very cerebral, how to think, how to get out of your own way. How to think, it has visuals, super cool. How to eat.
Look at how good you look on the cover.
That is not airbrushed, my friend. What do you mean on the cover? I'm just kidding.
You're looking chiseled.
How to eat, exactly. Plate style, everything, grocery list, you name it, recipes, which they're amazing. How to eat, how to move. It has protocols for exercise. You do not need a gym. There's a million different ways to get it done. But this is a playbook. If you want X, let me deliver X. How to eat, how to think, how to move, how to recover.
I love it.
I'm very proud of this. I'm actually way more proud of this book than I am of the last one.
Wow.
Yeah. And I ever really say anything like, oh, wow, this is great? Never. You've never heard me say that.
Well, your books are like your children, so those are strong
Well, then
words.
I have a first unruly child, and this is my second well-behaved one, which, again, it has visuals in it. And that is, I spend a lot of time on these graphics as to how to construct. Some people are visual learners, and then some people can just read. But for me, I wanted, what does the visual plate look like? What do these I even have workouts in there. The whole thing with visuals. It's cool.
It's amazing. Very excited for it. Well, I love having you in. You're the best.
Are you going to have carbohydrates next time?
Of course, yes. Gosh. Baked potato, ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to DoorDash it to your house so that it's there when I'm
Deal.
arriving.
And a big brontosaurus rib for you to gnaw on.
Well, thanks for having me. We're like brother and sister. We always have the best time.
I know. I love it. You're the best. Well, tell my audience where they can find you on. So, I'm sure many of my listeners, if not all of them, already do follow you. But in case they don't, where can they find you on social media? I know you've got this wonderful podcast as well, and your book. Where can they pick up your book? All the things.
You can go to my website, the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Instagram, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, YouTube. Our YouTube is doing phenomenal. It's amazing. We really turned it around. Very educational. My podcast, The Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show, free newsletter. We have a medical practice called Strong Medical, which, by the way, when things go down, I know I'm your first call.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just really all the things. And I believe, I'll leave people with this. I believe truly, and you've known me for years, that collectively we can become a better, stronger society. And the only way that that is going to work, it's not going to be one person. It's not just going to be me. It has to be me. It has to be you. It has to be the people that are listening. Collectively behave in a certain way and execute in a certain way so that we can collectively become stronger.
Oh, hell yeah. It's a bottom-up movement.
That's right.
I love it. Well, thanks, Dr. Lyon. You are the best, and I don't say that lightly. Love you. You're amazing. Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode around with friends and loved ones that may benefit from it. Check out the Forever Strong Playbook. I love Dr. Lyon's work. We are so aligned on so many different topics, and she's just such a sweetheart. And I will catch you all on the next episode. Peace.
Of the Genius Life. Woo. Do.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.